Derek, thanks for coming on the show. I
Of course,
appreciate it.
man.
Thanks for making the trek over to the East Village.
Yeah, here in New York City, we got a bag of caffeine. This is pretty cool.
Drinking the Puerto Rican coffee.
Yeah.
I was so stoked to see that my local PR coffee shop is like 2 blocks away. They're gonna get not that anyone watches our podcast yet, but if anyone does, they're gonna get a lot of free sort of earned media value from the amount of times that 7A Stefan got called out.
Well, you got to go interview the guy who
Yeah,
runs
the
the
CEO
place,
is
and
there.
then
Yeah.
he'll humbly shield the podcast.
Yeah, let's hurry this up so we can go do 2 podcasts. No, I'm just kidding. On the way, as we were walking back from grabbing that coffee, you were telling a little bit about how you kind of found your way into Warmly.
Yeah.
So how'd that go?
So a few years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I was working at this soft robotics company. Basically, they filled bags that looked exactly like this coffee bag with vegetable oil, and they excited electrodes through it, and it expanded and contracted in kind of a muscly form.
Software robotics, like software robot.
Soft robotics, yeah.
Okay.
So robotics that had performant qualities similar to that of like organic material, like your muscles.
Oh.
So your muscles are taking energy and they're expanding and contracting
Yeah.
by virtue of that energy. And so you can take things like thin films and plastics, and if you just plug electricity through them, basically they have similar properties as like organic material would, like muscle and tissue. So anyways, we had this crazy company that was highly like research funded. We spent a lot of time writing NSF, NASA, US Army grants just to get money to figure out how to commercialize this like bag of vegetable oil. And it wasn't really working out. We had cool contracts like to build robofish for surveillance purposes
Yeah, like
in the
what would be
oceans.
the use case?
That was the challenge, and part of why I was there was to help the CEO at the time figure out how to commercialize this thing. So there was some use cases in industrial automation for actuation systems. Basically, they're massive mile-long conveyor belts in things like Walmart or Target distribution centers, and they have these little brakes.
Okay.
And some of them, they're mainly pneumatic, so they push air through them to stop the conveyor belt to control for speed. But if you have these like squishy braking systems, like these more like organic material systems, you basically get more control over speed. It's not necessarily as like binary.
Okay.
There's more variability in the motion. So there's things like industrial automation, and then defense was the other big one, and space, which kind of rolled into it. So NASA, for example, they had this grant that they wanted us to build also another actuation system, a similar braking type technology that wouldn't get space dust on it. And so because it was covered in this like plastic material thing, it didn't have any mechanical bolts or gears or parts that dust can get inside and then
Okay.
break the system down.
That's cool.
So there was these really strange use cases. And obviously with defense, they wanted biological looking surveillance systems or things that they could use for defense purposes. So in this case, it was this like robo-fish that moved like a fish, because these bags would expand and contract, and you could make it sort of wavelengthy, like a fish.
This sounds like some like James Bond,
some
like Q,
evil,
like here's this like spy fish little.
Yeah. It sounded really cool, but it was insanely hard to sell.
I can imagine.
And so the shop just
Wow.
became a research like funding vehicle.
Okay.
And so I spent a lot of my time just writing grant solicitations on these websites.
Were you studying engineering, or what were you studying?
No, so I went to business school.
Okay.
I really didn't want to go to college. I
Yeah.
thought it was a total waste of time. I was like, I want to go start companies. Why would I just go start a company? What is business school going to teach me about it? Promised my parents I'd go for a year. Ended up staying because I went to CU Boulder, had a really awesome and flourishing startup community that I spent my time like skipping class, and instead just like reached out to founders to like let me come work on their stuff for free or just talk to them. And that's what I was interested in.
Maybe that's why we get along so well. It's funny. I remember having a similar conversation with my parents. It was in my case, it worked out all right because I had an auto detailing company called Max Wax Auto Detailing. And I was like, I had, I was like licensed, insured. I had a little website. I had like this trailer that I drive around. And I remember being like very arrogant, just being like, why would I go to college? I like, I'm making $1,000 a week detailing cars,
Yeah.
Then I ended up, then my determination was like, okay, well, if you're going to force me to go to college, I'm going to go to Colorado where I can ride my bike.
Yeah. Yeah. Ironically, I think people that are more anti-authoritarian or anti-seeks authority somehow find that somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right? Like institutionally, could not care less what the school was going to teach me. I just didn't believe that, someone who's got an MBA studying how to start a business and is now teaching how to start a business instead of ever starting a business, has it's just not relevant.
Yeah.
And so founders for me was like, that's authority I sought out instead.
So how did you find, so was Warmly then like your first job straight out of school?
I was working basically full time at both of these companies.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think I was a junior in college at the software robotics startup. Going into senior year, that's when I started getting into Warmly, and I've been there since.
How'd you get the Warmly gig?
So because selling RoboFish is really hard, I got the classic, after a year of doing that, I got the classic takeaway, which is anyone who goes into hardware says hardware is hard.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to try software instead. And being in Boulder, there's a lot of exposure to the Techstars portfolio companies. And so founders working on early stage stuff, typically software products. And so I thought that would be a good entry point into figuring out what I wanted to do from there or what I'd want to build by virtue of joining a company like that. And so at the time, I reached out to one of my friends who worked at Zoom, and he was building the developer advocacy program there. And they were just about to release this beta partnership where they'd bring on 20 startup companies to build a technology on top of Zoom. This was in like the throes of COVID. And so Zoom, I think at its peak had like 250 million daily active users, maybe even 300 million. I think it's down to 100 million now. So everyone is on Zoom. They say, hey, let's invite some companies to come build these software products on top of Zoom that were already within, there was no set, they didn't scope in what types of products can be built in, but they're like, let's just experiment with 20 different companies. So Max, Alan, Karina, the co-founders at Warmly today, they were working on something else. They were getting ready to pivot into the third product, and they wanted to get onto this Zoom apps beta program. And so when I asked my friend, hey, I want some founders that I could talk to, potentially join company for, pitch a job basically, he knew of Max because he was trying to get into these like one of 20 companies.
Okay.
And so I said, hey, can we make an arrangement? Max just raised some money. They're probably going to want to hire. And this is a fantastic distribution opportunity for them going on Zoom to these 100 million daily active users that their app widget is just going to be right in the taskbar, right? Like startups dream about that type of distribution. And so I was like, well, I guess I'll just be a growth marketing intern for you, and I'll help you just like take advantage of the distribution. And so Tommy, my friend at the time, had sort of got us in touch. And then Max let me pitch him, and I've been there ever since.
Shout out Tommy.
Yeah, shout out Tommy.
Were they in Colorado? Techstars is in Colorado, right?
They did Techstars Boulder in Colorado. They were hopping around for a bit. I think this is after they returned from living in Hawaii for a period of time, where they did YC.
Okay.
So I think that YC batch, summer 2020, was remote. They decided to just go to Hawaii because it's like, whatever, it's remote. Let's just go do somewhere nice. And then they did Techstars Boulder.
What was the idea that they pitched at YC?
They were working on job change tracking, basically. So people that buy your product, you want to monitor where they go from job to job because they're going to be your next champion. And so that turned out to be, I think, a big headache on the data side of things.
Okay.
Like technically speaking. And then, there's a few other things that didn't make it as much. It was more push than pull in terms of the people they were selling to. And so they decided to switch gears.
Okay.
This was a bit before my time, so I don't have full context.
Totally. And so then did you say you met Maximus in Colorado, or how was it? How did that, you pitched him. So like how did the connection happen?
Yeah, so Tommy put us in touch.
Put you in touch.
In email.
Yeah.
And then I met Max on Zoom a couple weeks later. I think he was being a ski bum in Breckenridge.
Nice.
He's growing out his COVID flow hair and everything.
Amazing.
And grainy Zoom background, whatever. And I think it was like 2 calls after that. Just continued to talk about what the role might look like. Went back to the team and then ultimately made the invitation to come on.
What was your pitch?
It was that, which is like, you're gonna come. You had just raised some money. I'm sure you want like cheap labor, like interns, as a Wise founder, and you're gonna be on Zoom, big distribution opportunity, and so having a growth marketing person to come in and utilize that and figure out different ways to grow users like is probably advantageous to you. It was a bit off the cuff, honestly. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I never worked in software, never had like a growth marketing role like that. And so that was generally my pitch was, this is a cool lever, like let me pull it.
What did you do for the first like 6 months?
For the first 6 months, so big learning for building a company on top of a big incumbent is that you do not have the luxury that you would of your own timeline if you were building it just yourself. So Zoom was quite slow and was fairly abrasive in terms of hitting the timelines that they had said they were going to commit to. And so a lot of it was just collecting different, was coordinating launch plans for the general admission when it would go public to everybody. And so we wanted to make sure across like all socials, all like email systems. So when users did come in, they were like, hey, here's how you can get started. Classic like email drip nurturing sequence stuff. And then, making sure we had activated this early community of advocates that we had in our reach because we were a Techstars company, a YC company, and we had a handful of investors at the time. We wanted to make sure that we sort of tapped into making Warmly feel like it was this exclusive, business tool that people were using to meet one another. Because our early target audience was founders and venture capitalists. Because you're getting on these calls, founders are raising during COVID. Like you're not on Sand Hill Road, with a more sort of put together pitch. How do you actually build relationships on Zoom? That was sort of the pitch that we wanted to make to the market. And so it was a series of just activating those people that would be our target audience to talk about how great Warmly is.
I should know this, but I don't have it right in front of me. How many years has it been from like when you started to now?
It has just, as of like last week, crossed 3 years.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
And I'm curious that like that first year, I'd imagine you were probably doing a lot of different stuff.
Oh yeah, everything. I touch every different part of the business besides engineering.
Is there anything that stands out? Like the show's called Learning at Scale, but I'm just curious, like, is there anything that really punctuates that learning? I feel like there's something often about the first year in a position like that. At least that was my experience.
Yeah.
I'm curious, is there anything that you really walked away from that first year, like having figured out or thought was interesting or learned?
I think maybe it was more of a junior green around the gills type takeaway, which is if you don't make a choice, it will be inevitably made for you.
Yeah.
Like when there's an opportunity to present a proposal, like propose or else you're going to sort of get relegated to someone else's. And so for me, that first year was actually learning how to say no to a lot of things.
Interesting.
And discerning like, where is this something that I can be an A+ player at versus not? So for example, like sales was not the thing that I was going to be A+ at.
Okay.
It's very clear early on. And I didn't have like a formal quote or whatever. It was just there was momentum happening in the business and we just needed Swiss Army knives everywhere.
Right.
Unless you're engineering.
Okay.
And so across like sales, customer success, marketing, biz ops, even sort of like a quasi chief of staff role to Max, our CEO, product eventually. That was a little bit later, but I think that year was, learning how to sort of make your proposal or get relegated to somewhere else that you might not want and might not be in the best service of the company and you in terms of what you're exceptional at.
How many team members were there when you came on?
I think there was maybe 11, 12,
Okay.
something like that.
And how big is the team now?
The team 25, 27.
25. Okay.
So I think for the first 2 years, it kind of hovered around that 15, 16, 17 range while we were still figuring stuff out. And then I would say over the last year, that's when we've started hiring and have made plans to hire further from there.
And so you came in as like this growth marketing Swiss Army knife, and then you were kind of floating around a lot of these different functions, it sounds like?
Yeah, exactly.
Always like coming back to marketing, or
Yeah.
doing it through a marketing angle, or how did that?
Yeah, doing it through a marketing angle is a good way to phrase it. I also at the time was after doing more, I would say, content related growth marketing, things on social or evangelism with advocates, things like that. There was a unique opportunity, I thought, to invest more in kind of like our PLG motion.
Okay.
This is when PLG was all the rage and still kind of is. I definitely hopped on that and wanted to figure out how to actually monetize this like Zoom product thing by building different growth loops.
Okay.
And so I really wanted to know what the leveling framework was of what actions does someone take as a user to get to value, and then what is the threshold or inflection point at which they'd probably be willing to put down a credit card. And so I experimented a lot, especially with our team, around like this idea of the happy path. Like, what does the user need to do to experience some magical moment? How many times do they need to experience that magical moment within what amount of time before they would say, I'd pay $7 a month for this on my own? Because at the time we were doing more of a Slack approach, which is like the thesis, I guess, that we had came up with early was intercompany adoption is how we're going to win, meaning we aggregate as many bottom-up users to then go and sell top-down and bring it wall-to-wall. So this was the Slack mode, which is get at least 3 people to send, I can't remember how many messages it was, but they found some magic retention number that if they activated to do these steps, they took these actions, it increased the likelihood that they would invite a friend, stay on the platform, and then ultimately it made it very easy for our sales team to come in top down and say, hey, look, Max, Derek, whoever is using Slack, they've sent this amount of messages, they've been using it for Y amount of time, you should probably be on a business plan, right?
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the marketing angle for me as it related to, for example, something like product, is I wanted to figure out like how could you monetize this more bottoms up end user motion to then make it easy for sales to sell.
It prompts a couple of questions. My first one is, what's a growth loop?
Yeah. I think a growth loop is something where each incremental input generates some N to 2 of that input. And so for us, just to be more like tangible about it, our growth loop that worked really well was when you became a user in our Zoom app, you have to authenticate your. I don't think they'll be upset about this, but you have to authenticate permissions to access like Zoom and your calendar, because we hooked in with your calendar because we told you people that you were meeting with to prepare you. And so because you get contacts from people's calendars, the second someone becomes a user and joins, like 5 emails get sent off to your coworkers saying, hey, wouldn't you like to join Max, your teammate, on Warmly? He uses it to look more professional in Zoom.
Nice.
Right? And so you're like, oh, okay, this is strange, but I'll maybe join this. And so each action that was taken, each incremental user that joined generated 2 or 3 out of that. And so that's kind of like what a loop is.
I'm curious, did you ever have one of those like blow up in your face? Those kinds of like...
Oh yeah, definitely. At one point in time, I was doing this very manually when I first figured out that it was going to work. So what I would do is I would pull contacts from something like Seamless or Apollo, meaning like who at this company can I download contacts from given this user at that company. And then I would send manual HubSpot broadcasts to these people and try and throttle them. And I think a good learning here was if you need to know what your limitations are. And so you kind of need to push the boundaries. Yeah. So I got quite egregious, like borderline egregious with the amount of emails I would send at these companies. And
Yeah.
if you imagine like larger companies, you're sending a lot of these emails. Like I'm not scraping 2 or 3 people at some small startup. Like I want maximum sort of lift for the manual work that I'm doing.
Napalm.
Yeah. And so that's what I did is I napalmed Atlassian, and they got really, really upset. So I think I scraped like 300 people from their company. And this is me as like very green around the gills intern, like just testing the waters of what I could get away with, because the numbers were fantastic in terms of conversion. I knew what the ROI was, and so at that point, the goal is just make an infinite lever, right?
Yeah.
Just keep pushing that. And so I think their head of security or something directly emailed Max, their CEO, and was like, "This is unacceptable." 350 Atlassian employees just got an email saying that, Warmly is now approved for their Atlassian Zoom instance. Like, this is not okay. They went and then got the Zoom CSM, who was then like, hey, they also slapped us on the wrist for that.
Oh no.
So
what did Maximus say?
He is amazing in times of crisis, like all CEOs, I think. And so he had this wonderful apology. Guarantee it would never happen again. We'll delete you from all of our systems, blah, 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 blah. I actually don't remember exactly what he did, but I remember the moment I went to him and I said, hey, I did this thing. And I was amazed at how resiliently calm he was. I was sort of like struggling to get it out of my mouth. Like, this is what I did. I fucked up. And he was like, just tell me what it is. So I told him, and he was like, okay. And he just kind of goes quiet for a little bit, starts writing an email. And then he's like, well, we'll figure this out. Just kind of like dropped off the call. It was gone. I think that's like the resiliency that you need as a founder, which is like, it's your job to build like firehouses, and these are your departments and your people and the tools and things that you equip them with. And ideally they resolve them yourself. But in the early days as a founder, like, you're the sole fireman in a way. And so he had to put out that fire for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's a quality to it where it's if you're not like pushing up against the boundary, you're probably playing it a little too safe. So
too safe, exactly.
Inevitably there's gonna be some point where you step over a little bit.
I think it was a goal for our team early on to have at least like one mea culpa moment a month or something like that. Yeah. Like, where if you weren't messing up and apologizing for something like that, then you're not, pressing the boundaries.
I imagine though, like, have you those, like, they'll have in the factory, it's like however many days since an accident. Mm-hmm. I'm imagining Warmly offices, however many days since an accident, better not get over 30.
No, if it's been over 30, it's like, something's wrong. Something's wrong. We got to mess something up now.
So I'm curious, now that you're getting into this head of marketing role, where you're obviously having to probably take more of a, not to say that you didn't have a big picture view early on, but more, when you're, doing those early things, it's more see-ball, hit-ball, right? Like, you're doing this thing and you're trying to drive this output, and then do another thing and try to drive this output. How did you like cross that chasm to go from like looking at the individual components to then starting to think bigger picture and like what's the overall thesis here?
Yeah. Well, the transition, I wouldn't say was graceful, so to speak. It was more so like, this needs to happen.
Right.
And so in classic sort of startup fashion, Alan, who I was working with at the time doing marketing, and this is now our like Warm Leads product. We had since strategically divested the Zoom product by the time that I started doing marketing for this one. And I saw him early on, maybe 9 months ago or so, really pushing for building a category around this new tool, and why category creation was so important. And as I saw him mobilize a lot of different efforts to create a category around our space, and we can go further in depth on that, I saw that it was more clear to me that we were making a very concerted effort to say, like, this is what we believe is the winning strategy for in B2B SaaS. And I think I don't know too many marketers that are intentional in the way they discern what the winning strategy is in their space. Like, I think it's seldom that I have come across like a marketer, and maybe this is just because we're more early stage and interact with more early stage people, But our thesis, for example, is we believe that brand is the last defensible moat in B2B SaaS.
Okay.
And brand is a function of reputation, of what people say about you, and you do that through content creation. And if you're in soft robotics, for example, or in Zoom, like what is your thesis for why you win in marketing? I don't meet too many people that put that on paper and say, like, this is sort of the 5-paragraph essay of why we win short and long term.
Being able to identify the thing.
Being able to identify the thing. Because a lot of marketing, I think, the role is interesting. And to go back to your point around when you're an IC, you're just in this swim lane and you just execute on that swim lane.
Yeah.
And then when you zoom out and evaluate all your options as sort of like the marketing head, all these different swim lanes, you start asking yourself, like, how do these cohesively even work together? And that's interesting learning for me, as marketing has so much coordination overhead that you have a lot of siloed and specialized functions, maybe even more than any other department, that don't necessarily have a clear why behind the way they work together. So for example, your like SEO, right, content writers and stuff like that are putting out blogs for keyword research to take advantage of search volume activity. And then you've got people talking about, you have these like talking head videos on your podcast talking about whatever.
Yeah.
And then you have paid ads running these like competitor comparison thing. Like, it's not exactly clear how this rolls up into some bigger picture, or how this is sort of a concerted effort to serve some larger marketing thesis for why you win. And I think having a worldview, especially in your space, given some track history of other competitors that have ultimately won and how and why, is like an important mental activity that I was kind of given the opportunity to think through a little bit.
It's like this multi-layer optimization problem. Like
Yeah.
at the IC level, like you're optimizing the thing, but then
Yeah.
when you're at the head level, you're optimizing the things.
Yeah.
It's
yeah. How does that lend itself to like buyer psychology, or like you're thinking about it from the perspective of you as a trader, but like what interests you about pricing specifically from the perspective of the buyer?
People are really bad at mentally pricing options.
Gotcha.
Like there's the one thing is like people are really bad at, humans as a whole are really bad at assigning accurate probabilities to things like long tail risk, right? So one example could be, and this isn't necessarily something that we've had to do, but like if you're thinking about how you set like performance guarantees or things like that within contracts, like that is an option. And you can, if you are aware that this event, like the worst case scenario, which is often like in a buyer's mind, the thing that they're trying to avoid is the worst case scenario. If you think about it through that lens, there's often things that you can do with pricing to remove the possibility of the worst case scenario event. And for them, that might seem like a big boon or like a big value add to the contract. But if you actually had a way of doing the math, you would see that you just sold an option on a 0.5% probability outcome. That is the thing that people are worried about. And that's a little bit of like a theoretical example. But
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of that. And just thinking about how you can layer options into stuff. Like, well, and like making, like understanding just what incentives are worth and stuff like that. I mean, we'll do bigger ones like we don't have any like long-term contracts. We have all of our contracts have like a 28-day out. And so that gives our clients like huge optionality. Because then it's like if you oftentimes in the like, this doesn't sound like self-aggrandizing. I probably won't put this in the podcast, but like we do really good work in the performance marketing space, I think, and the agencies that we compete with are not like our size. They're like 10 times our size or 20 times our size.
Yeah.
And we are very much like that, like premium agency, I guess, in terms of pricing and whatever. And so it makes it a lot easier to have that conversation when it's like, well, they're all signing you to a 12-month contract. We're giving you a 28-day out. Like our contracts have so much embedded optionality that it's like, why wouldn't you as a rational actor go with us? And then if we suck, fire us after 60 days and go sign the 12-month contract that you're going to sign anyway. Because if you get it wrong the other way, you're going to lose, in that example, 6 times as much money or more with the lost time and the fees paid and stuff. So it's just like, I think going back to your question, there's like when you start to think about things like how do I sell an option to my customer in the contract, that then makes it much more valuable to them.
Have you ever had a prospect go with a different agency? And the key word that stuck out to me there was rational actor, right? Like you
Yeah,
give them
very
all these
rare.
escape hatches, or you give them that like quote unquote $100 million offer. Like there's no way you can say no to this. All of this is built in purpose to be advantageous to you. But like, has there ever been a time where on paper it was a worse option, technically speaking, or contractually, but the prospect went with someone else?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
100%.
And why is that?
I think probably the most common one is that for better or for worse, there's probably a perception in agency where they'll, and this is probably the most frustrating one, they'll like look on LinkedIn and see how many employees you have. And then they'll be like, okay, well, I'm going to estimate the quality of service you're going to give me based on the number of employees that you have. That's very frustrating as a business owner because like the financial metric, I mean, apart from growth and things, but the thing that Alex and I look at is like net income per employee.
Yeah.
We want to be a highly efficient business. And I think that that is good for it's good for us, and it's good for our customers, and it's good for our employees. Because what it means is that, things like a lot of agencies will, big client fires you, they'll fire the staff. Or there will be some headcount reduction. It's very common. And, knock on wood, of course, like at some level, if a lot of clients fired us at some point, we'd have to make some hard call. But it would have to be a lot of clients, right? Mm-hmm. And so we design the business to be highly efficient in those ways. And so then it's frustrating when you get decayed from a process because someone's like, oh, well, you only have this many employees, your work can't be that good. And it's like, well, that's ridiculous. You know what I mean? Like our whole thing is that our view on the space is that I think marketing requires you to have these, like a healthy dose of maybe, and a lot of experimentation, and we really don't know. And I think that once you accept that as like, for a lot of these things, like we're defining the playbook as we go. If you think about it just as basically as like, do you think the algorithm, whether for paid or organic, is the same today as it was a year ago? So why would you then work with an agency that has some overly defined playbook and a huge staff built around that defined playbook? I would rather work with an agency that is designed to be nimble and be able to say, okay, this is the thing that works now, and this is the thing that works tomorrow. Not in a frenetic, like frantic kind of unfocused way, but just having that, again, optionality. So that kind of thing, I think, but that, now that I say it, it comes back to just, find the right customers. Like when we find the right customers, we don't have to explain anything to them, and they don't have, I'm sure you probably experienced that at Warmly. Like you don't have to overly explain this thing and justify and rationalize and try to get them to understand, because the people that are going to get it, they'll get it.
Yeah. The worst thing that you can do is preamble, like just build up the 5-paragraph essay for why you should go with us versus not. Like it should feel instantaneous. I also think it's really strange that from the buyer's perspective, with agencies, the goalpost is number of employees. Yeah. Because like for marketing, especially with us, and also being a startup that's lean, we want to have the lowest number of people on the marketing team for the highest revenue amount.
Exactly.
Smallest possible growth team for the biggest possible business.
And also it's such a bullshittable number. Like if that's what it takes to win, like, okay, let's go, hey Alex, let's go, VPN in some places, spin up some LinkedIn profiles and put 30 people on the LinkedIn. Like,
yeah, if you really wanted to.
If you really wanted to, or get a bunch of contractors and ask them to put their, whatever it may be. Like it's just such a silly thing. I mean, we like on our website, we just have like the 28-day contract. We're just like the only thing that drives retention is results or something like that. And I believe that, it's true. It's like, why would the agency have a better deal than the whole marketing team? Like how many people on your marketing team at Warmly have a 12-month contract?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Right. Effectively, it's a marketing mix, right? It's depending how much time and money you're investing in all these different things. And like, there's certainly a corollary to that in investing, where it's like, if you're constructing and in investing, there's formulas and math that you can put to this to sort of identify the optimal portfolio and so on. But the idea being that like if you have 10 securities or 20 securities, you'll look at like the return over some period of time and the volatility defined by certain terms and whatever, you'll like put this stuff into a model and you'll arrive at this like recommended allocation based on some overall like portfolio target volatility that you're trying to back into, right? Like, you add up the standard deviation of all these different things to arrive at like an overall standard deviation. And the thing that has struck me as interesting, spending the last 5 years in marketing, and before that having spent, the preceding years in finance, is that in marketing, it feels like there's often this desire to apply this level of mathematical rigor that is fundamentally impossible in marketing, right? Like everyone's looking at all this data, and you hear a lot of people talking about experiments and like statistical significance of experiments and all this stuff. And if you actually like zoom, not to like pontificate too deeply on this, but like if you zoom out and you just like think about the thing, right? Like it's kind of ridiculous to really get too deep into the math of it in a way. Obviously, like not to say you don't have to look at the numbers and look at the data, but just because like if we're talking about something like, performance of an organic post or performance of ads or whatever, during this, like you probably aren't looking at it on a long enough time horizon, because like just on a baseline level to have true like significance, regardless of whether your sort of A/B testing tool tells you have significance, like to have true significance, you probably would have to run it over multiple years, because most businesses have seasonality. So if you're running it for 3 months, like have some embedded seasonality in there, and that's just one thing. The algos are changing, like how many changes happened on the website while you were also running this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all this to say, you you strike me as someone that has, from the conversations we've had, you have this kind of like, I don't know if you have a systematic approach, like you put a lot of thought into these things. And I'm curious how you go about now stepping into this head of marketing role, deciding where to place the energy and how much of it is like looking at specific data or numbers, and how much of it is like, this thing worked really well last week. Like it's pretty clear.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Did I lose the question with the explanation?
No. I think I know what you're saying. And it goes back to what we talked about around you're in a bad spot when you have to give the preamble.
Yeah.
Like where you over rationalize a bunch of things to make your decision like seem really right. And there's a time and place for that. What initially came up for me while I was listening to you was any time that I spent, the projects I spent the most amount of time sort of experimenting and rationalizing and analyzing the data and A/B testing and doing all this stuff, was the stuff that did not move the needle at all. Ironically.
Yeah.
Any time that I took an idea in sort of in a vacuum and was like, this is why it's going to work, this very tactical email campaign, for example, or email broadcast, like this is what its purpose is going to do, and this is, how we're going to run the test and change the wording around and the subject line and blah blah blah, like, did not work. That's not what moved the needle. It was only when I think we took a step back and asked, and I think the proclivity to look at numbers is so desirable because it's so clear, versus having this more long tail wait and see approach. It's kind of like, is your marketing machine more analogous to like a cow grazing, very short incremental gains, like in investing? Like, are you going to put that thing into an ETF and just let it sit for 20 years? Or do you have like this more of a lion approach, which is like highly ambitious, very uncertain, but if you win, you kind of get it big. And I think you can't get to the like ambitious, weird, nebulous lion appetite for marketing if you're only just looking at numbers and data. And this goes back to what we had talked about, like what is your thesis for why you win? Because if you've really started to crystallize that, the goal then becomes increased top line distribution through the vehicle of the thesis and whatever activities that get you there, and then go back and increase step over step conversion. And I think that's what a lot of people spend a lot of time on, is what is the A/B test result? What is the statistical significance? But like, that's step 2. Step 1, for us at least, is increase top level distribution. Find the thing that works to go from 0 to 1, and then 1 to n. That's when you bring in the people to start doing the experimentation, the regression analysis, like all this sort of what I would say mental masturbatory sort of stuff.
It's
like you don't want to be. And sorry to interrupt, but
no.
I think making decisions by Excel spreadsheet is just not a good place to be in.
Oh yeah.
There's a helpful time and place for it with anything, but I kind of like what one of the first investors said in the book Shoe Dog about Phil McKnight, when everyone was saying like, why are you putting money into this for him to build this factory and build these shoes, whatever? Like, who cares? It's like people put such stupidity is derived from just numbers.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a good take. And
Yeah.
marketing is it sounds like a classic marketing thing to say, but I think this is one of those cases.
Well, it's a good point. I mean, I think what it comes down to when I hear you talking about it is that you have like you can probably assign some level of like expected value to most actions, whether it's super precise or it's just sort of your sense of kind of what it's going to be. And ultimately, like if you're coming up with some new program or new, however you define it, new strategy or like new thread to pull on to drive growth, that inherently it can have quite a like that can have a, it can have an unbounded impact. Like you don't know until you do it. It can have a huge impact. But any optimization of a thing that is already existing, like you're kind of optimizing on the margins. I don't know, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you can make it a lot better, but it's rare that you're going to take a thing, and certainly it happens, I think, but like it's rare that you're going to take a thing and then optimize it to be like 100 times better. You're going to optimize it to be more efficient, but you kind of have to balance the two efforts. Like you have to constantly, and that's probably the hardest part, I'd imagine. Like you have to create these new things and keep coming up with the new ones, and then also like keep making the existing ones better. I think that's kind of what you were getting at with like, you build it and then you sort of pass it on to someone or however you handle that to, like, within the team.
Definitely. And I think with the interesting part too is to want to say either or. Sometimes it's both and. Like going back to marketing, just being a big coordination problem. A lot of stuff has to just be actioned at once.
Right.
And so you want to sort of like identify each swim lane for what it is, and sort of like understand what your return on is on it, or the conversion or whatever. But you have to activate all these different channels at the same time, and that's why I think. If you have this really compelling thesis for why you win, all of those are easily justifiable. Versus the CEO is going to want to come in and look at each different swim lane, like performance marketing, like let me look at SEO, ads, whatever, like what is the ROAS or something on that. And it's very easy to start evaluating things in that way and want to cut or just look at the numbers and see what it is. But what is the overall bigger, like what we call your church, like how are you building that?
Yeah, it's funny, I was talking to another founder yesterday who was talking about how they look at like blended CAC as like a key metric, and it's interesting kind of what you just said prompts that, because I've noticed, having just gotten to be around a lot of really successful operators, that it seems like the ones that have the highest like decision accuracy and like drive really fast growth are the ones that are like simultaneous. Like, you're looking at the specific data points like the micro, but they're always hinged to the overall blended numbers, because the specific stuff can lie to you so often. But going back to this idea of like building a thesis, one thing that impresses me about you guys, and I think is cool, it's like the Warmly crew. You guys seem like you have this really strong bias to action. But it's also simultaneously like very well thought out. Not to say that bias for action and it being well thought out are mutually exclusive, but like you guys have this pretty clear thesis, that your marketing thesis that you're kind of building the marketing around. And I'm curious, like, how do you go about, we talked about like your time as in more of an IC running these experiments, how you're thinking about this like multi-layered optimization problem. How do you take a step back from that to then build a thesis, which I think is obviously specific, probably also more conceptual in a way?
It's very conceptual, but it's interesting how it ties back to how it tactically gets executed on. So taking a step back on the thesis, like I think what we needed to do by virtue of building a sales and marketing tool and platform. So we did the Zoom thing. Now we de-anonymize companies and contacts on your website, for B2B companies. And then we automate the outreach to those companies and contacts through email, LinkedIn, and chat, website chat. So that's just context for what we do now. And so sales and marketing SaaS is extremely saturated, and building software is extremely cheap. And so technology as a moat, or you can kind of go down different strands across like data or network effects, things like what about your technology is special? Not a lot, actually. It's very easy to copy companies and what products they do. And in fact, we did that like 16 months ago. We just found a small player in the space. We thought this was directionally correct. We could build a better business off of it. And now we've surpassed them, and now we're focusing on bigger fish. And it goes back to who is this city on the hill that you aspire to be like, but ultimately surpassed because they didn't do something right. And it was ultimately their sort of like hamartia, like
Right.
it was their tragic fall. For us, that was Drift. So we looked back 2015 to like 2020, like what happened to Drift and why did they work so well? And that's because we were building an AI chat tool at the time. And they had the best brand by far out of any other tool, sales or marketing tool, and specifically this term and phrase around conversational marketing within chatbots. Like that was a very new phraseology for people to say. And so they built a category around conversational marketing with this chatbot, and they built this massive surround sound megaphone brand that was just 100% share of customer voice out in the ether of LinkedIn.
Okay.
And when you thought about Drift, you thought about their content. Like, oh yeah, the chatbot tool, but I love the marketing. I love those guys. And so it's also a B minus tool, or like a C plus tool, probably a C plus tool. And so what's going on there when you have technology being ranked on the order of C, like C plus, C minus, and they're still winning deals, right? Like something about brand is working. And you also saw this with other companies like Clearbit. Clearbit, data intelligence tool, big contact database thing, similar to Apollo, ZoomInfo, some of those other guys. And they won a large percentage of, I think they won in general because they also had really great brand, which if we break down is reputation. And reputation comes from really compelling and quality content. It's educational and entertaining, and it's insightful substance. And so they had, when we had actually talked to the head of demand generation at Clearbit, they told us that their ebooks were some of the best like book value assets of the company because of how much revenue it generated from a pipeline standpoint. Just like one ebook that had a 6 months long sort of lag until it actually started generating revenue. I can't remember what the content was about, but it pulled in like 3 or 4 deals a quarter or something, right? Like just that single piece of content and asset. And I would say that was like phase 2 of the overall B2B marketing saga. Like first was probably your HubSpot era, like go directly to the decision maker, and that's how you market to them. The part 2 was probably like inbound marketing, creating a lot of content and things that would pull people in. And I think Drift and HubSpot and Clearbit fall into that realm too. 3 is like probably PLG, making it really easy for buyers and people that are checking out your stuff to experience your tool. And I think the last one now is media. And so I think we're taking part 2 of inbound marketing and dumping like fire on the jet fuel and saying like media, reputation, what people say about you, your percentage share of customer voice, doing that in a different way, leveraging the insights of the competitors that worked out really well in the past is how we inform the way we think about doing marketing. Hopefully that was a decent overview and not too all over the place.
No, it makes sense. I'm like, how do you, the thing that I feel with you guys is that we were talking about growth loops earlier, and there, in a way, I feel like it must be kind of like one big growth loop at Warmly. And what I mean by that is that you guys are selling a product that sales and marketing people use.
Yeah.
And you're also really good at sales and marketing.
Yeah.
So how much does like product drive marketing and marketing drive product when they're just uniquely given it would be different if you were, I don't know, what's another example? Like if you were selling iPad cases, like obviously like they're just different, but how they're so intimately involved with one another that how much of that kind of feedback drives the thesis?
Yeah. I think we I think you're right that it is this big growth loop with all these different efforts that are in service of sort of dogfooding our own thesis, which is like, we believe that your website from a product standpoint is the choke point of the business.
Right.
All go-to-market efforts are in service of ultimately driving people back to the website. And because we tell you who those people are and then we automate the outreach to those people, we spend a lot of time on the marketing side, like generating buzz and activity to come back to the site, especially on social. We think that part of the thesis of like how to actually do go-to-market is the impact of how buyers make decisions ever since like COVID. So in Saga, or part 1 and 2 of the overall B2B marketing saga, like people were looking online, ads, like ebooks, white papers, whatever, to make decisions about how they were going to buy. COVID hits, everything is on LinkedIn. Conversations are having conversations about tools or back channels in Slack communities, DMs, group threads, things like that, and especially LinkedIn. And so we surround sound and megaphone LinkedIn and socials because that's what ultimately we have found is the channel that drives traffic back to the site. And so once that happens, then we automate all the outreach to those people and say, oh, hey, Max, like, cool that you found us on the site, whatever. Would you like to talk about Warmly and how you received this email, right? Because that's us doing the work.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question. There is a bit of crossover of like the product fueling growth or capturing demand while marketing is creating demand. It's a bit of crossover there, but I think it's more so around like what is the megaphone that we're trying to build to go back to this choke point of the website and show people that.
And it's got to be kind of like in some way like a slam dunk for the sales team, right? When it's like they come to the website to do this thing, and when you get them using the thing, then it's sort of like, well, we're here talking, aren't we?
Yeah. Like you get the chat message, and it's like, oh, it says your name, your company, whatever. It's personalized, and then you also get an email and a LinkedIn notification the second that happens, right? Like I think I can't remember what study it was, but I think it's 7 seconds that people spend average time coming to your site, and then they bail and don't ever come back again.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have this 7-second window to capture the mind and the heart of the visitor. And for us, it's very compelling because we help people, generate more revenue from the website.
Yeah.
And do that immediately, instantly.
We've kind of, I think, danced around or like touched on some of this, like the tenets of your thesis, and kind of like hinted at it. But how do you break it down, the marketing thesis overall, or like the pillars of it, or however you describe like the kind of core pieces?
So because we are optimized for generating reputation and brand, what people say about us, we believe that the thesis is essentially one of the oldest forms of actually doing marketing, which is we're trying to build a church or a cathedral. I like cathedral. Sometimes Alan says church, but either or. And it's I think there's 2 parts to building a church, or if you look at religion, there is this overarching logos or word or doctrine, the Bible, that gives you a worldview for how to think about the world, or a heuristic to think about the world, or a lens to look at the world. And it's in service of offering some form of salvation, this existential problem that needs to be solved. And the doctrine, the scripture, the word, the logos is how you overcome that problem. And so, for example, if we use like Buddhism, for example, Buddhism, the existential problem is there is suffering. Like the Buddha said 2 things. I only teach 2 things, suffering and the end of suffering. Right, and then all the tenets of Buddhism go into actually the alleviation of that, understanding what it is, and blah, blah, blah. And you can look at things like Christianity as well. How do you make it into the kingdom of heaven or something? And I have a background, went to Jesuit school, so that's why I think about things from like a religious standpoint. But how is that any different from trying to sell a product? You have this problem, and you need mass trust, win over the hearts and minds of people, entrusting you to solve that problem. And in a space like SaaS, where everything is so cheaply and easily copyable and made, it does become about your reputation or your word, like your doctrine. Like, do people actually buy into your worldview?
Right.
More topically, like in the space, I think someone who does a good job at this is Chris Walker. Like, we're pretty informed by the way he thinks about things with like signal-based selling, reacting to different hand raises in the market on and off your website, wherever, for you to reach out to them. So I think like that influence you just have to build. And that's, I think, part one is if you're going to build a church, the first pillar is you have to have the right perspective on the market and where it's headed and how you come into it. And it's a very traditional story arc, which is like, this is the way the world is, this is why it's changing, and like this is, where we kind of slot in. This is our hero's journey in a way. Part two, or pillar two, is if you have a doctrine, if you have a scripture, if you have a logos, the Bible, you need to evangelize it. You need to have other people sharing the word outside of your own individual zone of influence, you internally as a company or a marketing team or your employees. And so Paul, like one of the disciples, he was tasked to go build churches. Like, hey, we need people to know about this. And so he had to just go and build churches and then spin them up and have people run them. And so that's what you kind of need to do with people outside of your immediate zone of influence, with partners, affiliates, advocates, influencers, people that subscribe to this worldview, your perspective on the market, where it's headed and why it's valuable and why you win, and they communicate that in their own words and voice. And the important part here is it's not like just building an audience or a following, but making it a participatory community, that this is an ongoing conversation about the message that you're delivering, right? Like, there is no, why do people have Bible study, right? Like, what does this mean? And what is the sort of allegorical significance of whatever? Like, there's still interpretation there. And I think that's what you want to hone in on the community side of things. Is it's not audience, us delivering the message, talking at you. It's this communion. Like, it's this bi-directional conversation that's happening of, is this actually, is doing signal-based selling the right thing to go? Or are those the right words? Like, how do you see that? Mm-hmm. And when they're having these back-channel conversations, dark social, LinkedIn, these like DM chats, like how buying decisions are being made, they're actively exercising that verbiage and message constantly. And then naturally you just get this affinity towards what resonates or doesn't. And so the evangelism, the missionary, the pillar, part number two, is also informing and synergistic with pillar number one of the doctrine. It's a feedback loop. It informs it. And so that's how we do that. That's more conceptually how we think about the two pillars, the thesis, and tactically you're creating a category around who you are in that worldview with things like content. So right. we have we could talk about the different types of content that we do. But across like your podcast, your blogs, whatever, everything that you do as a marketing team and with all of your evangelists, your missionary, rolls up into this singular strategic narrative about why you exist, where you are, this like logos, why you win. And so that's going back to not having marketing be this siloed thing where SEO blog content is talking about something entirely different than your talking head podcasts, right? Like, is that thematically in service of the doctrine, like your perspective of where the market is headed?
So those are the two pillars.
Those are the two pillars.
That's
yeah.
Cool. And how do you go then and think about turning that into like the execution plan? Right?
Yeah.
Just what you were just saying, right? Like, you have to make sure that the podcast, the talking head videos, the LinkedIn posts, the blog, all this stuff is sort of like in service of this greater goal and message. Mm-hmm. And like we were talking about earlier, like, it's this big optimization and coordination problem.
Yeah.
Like, how do you tackle that as a head of marketing?
If you know your strategic narrative, it's pretty easy to discern like what activity makes sense for you to do or not. And so tactically, I would say in terms of building the doctrine, the pillar number one, I think that is an activity that you do with your founders, and something that is still being crystallized for us, which is the output is a 4-part blog series of where the world has been, where has B2B marketing went, like with what I was sort of explaining with Drift and HubSpot, this sort of B2B marketing saga, 4 parts. How have buyers made decisions? How have buyers made buying decisions about sales and marketing software? Where is it headed? Where and where do you slot in? That's just a 4-part blog series. It's like a 5-paragraph essay, right, that you do in school. Like, this is what we believe for X, Y, and Z reason, and then you tie a bow around it, and that's a 4-part blog series. We're also, just to cite another example, pretty influenced by the early marketing team at Hockey Stack.
Okay.
They do marketing attribution software, and they built their strategic narrative around attribution 2.0, right? Like, marketers have a really hard time knowing what they do works, right, for a lot of different reasons. They have a tool that helps you do that. And so they just told the story of where have marketers been and what tools were they using to solve this existential problem of attribution. And it's just a 2-part blog series. And that becomes your strategic narrative. And so every piece of content ties back to being in service of how you think the world works. So we might have a talking head interview on our podcast about dark social or demand creation from things like dark social. That doesn't necessarily, it's not a one-hop jump to, we de-anonymize your website contacts and then retarget them, right? But it's part of our worldview for how we think go-to-market works. And so that interview is relevant because it ties back to this thesis. And so tactically, we also have different ways of breaking up content and for who. So we have the podcast, which Alan brings on, VP marketing, sales, CEOs from companies to talk about more, we'd say like top-down content that is aimed at decision makers or change makers within an organization that typically respond well to more high-level narrative topics. So, for example, he just had someone on the podcast, Chris Walker, who's going to talk about signal-based selling. Right, like he's got 150,000 LinkedIn followers. He's sort of created this narrative around signal-based selling. CEOs, VPs, they want to know the next thing to be thinking about strategically, and so that type of content is going to resonate with them. And we tie well to different signals in the market because we automate the channels to capitalize on those signals, and so that's a relevant piece of content that ties back to the narrative. The second type of content would be like middle out content. Once a change maker like a CEO or VP has kind of bought into the narrative, like, you're going to need someone to operationally implement that tool or platform, right? Because it's tied to you. And so these are like academy type videos of how to do X using Warmly. That could exist as like a blog or a video on the website. And so that also ties to the strategic narrative of sort of jobs to be done using your tool based on this overarching kind of strategy around signal-based selling. And the last one is like bottoms-up content that is aimed at the end user, the person who, once the change maker, the implementer have agreed that this is the way they want to do things for go-to-market, you have someone who's like tactically siloed IC end user doing that stuff. And so that could just be like LinkedIn talk, like videos or posts or things that generally gain mind share in an organization, where when someone comes in and says, "Hey, we're going to use this tool Warmly," they say, "Oh, I love their content. That's great." They know who you are, and they can kind of get behind things. So those are the different form factors that we tie back to how we pull this strategic narrative together to create the doctrine. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I'm always interested in the as someone that's like very much also doing this stuff at the same time and figuring it out, our own marketing and these things. I'm always really intrigued by like what are the practical first steps, right? Like so oftentimes when you're trying to do something like define a brand narrative, like that's a pretty big open-ended, unbounded problem.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if someone's listening to this and they're like, I resonate with this. This sounds like something that would help. I'm curious if you have any, I don't know, exercises or approaches, or just how did you, when you talked about like getting all the founders together, I think, and kind of like hashing this stuff out, and this, I think, 4-part blog series was maybe part of that. But how did, like, what would you recommend in terms of like action steps to go and start to distill that? Is there anything that comes to mind that you guys did that helps you turn a corner or anything like that?
I would say it kind of goes back to that writing that blog, putting on paper, long form, who you are and what you do. Alan did that in like a weekend.
Okay.
And it had gone through a lot of different iterations because we wrote it and then we put it out there on LinkedIn. We had, I think, like a newsletter, a LinkedIn newsletter that we pushed it through. And then we did a lot of like back channel DMs with our immediate network of other founders, people in YC, Techstars, investors. Like, we just shared it with as many people as possible and then kept refining it over time until we've got something that we felt like this was something that we really wanted to commit to. And for us, it was like creating this category around autonomous revenue orchestration. Like, we had so many people in conversation tell us about this problem that they're trying to solve, these RevOps people. And we're giving them this sort of blog series around how we think about that problem, and they're either turning their nose away or leaning in. And I think that was like a really good exercise, just immediately to get some feedback on, and to go to the second pillar around evangelism. Those people that you're sharing it with then feel connected to that problem you're solving. And so what we did, and over time now, I think we have like 120 like micro influencers, people who have some sort of influence within the go-to-market space, who constantly help us refine that strategic narrative. Like, that's not a one and done, dust off the hands, like,
Sure.
ooh, hard days of work, like,
Yeah.
we're done with that.
We got it.
Yeah, like that is constantly happening. And so, like, we redid the narrative, I think, 2 weeks ago.
Okay.
It is probably the 4th or 5th time
It's
now
a
that
living
we've done
document.
It's a living document.
Yeah.
And everything on the website, backlinks to it, every piece of media alludes to it, directly or indirectly. Like, that is sort of the highest book value asset in the company, I think.
That's awesome.
And so we get all these different influencer types or people that we're asking for feedback on, developing the narrative and conversation on DMs.
Huh.
And so anytime that we push out content, because it directly is going to tie back to this narrative, depending on how many sort of valence rings it directionally connects back, these people are commenting on it and sort of supporting on it. And it's this kind of ongoing communication that's, again, all about this problem that you solve. And so I think tactically, writing that, putting it out in your channel of influence, right? It might not be LinkedIn. For us, it is. It might be Twitter or something. And then building this early minimum viable cabal of people that really resonate with that problem just compounds over time. And I think actually that is probably like the highest impact thing that we've done since, is like get these 120 people to help us hone in on this message, mention us in different threads and channels that we wouldn't have otherwise seen, people on our team, on LinkedIn. And that's probably been the highest lever for sure.
As we kind of come to a close here, I'm curious, with all this stuff you're working on, like defining the thesis, executing it, stepping into, the head of marketing role, all this, is there anything that you're especially focused on learning at the moment?
Yeah, it's learning how to create more of a formal process around this missionary.
Sure.
And I think I'm especially impressed with people at Clay who have built their creator and expert programs, where you're actually incentivizing people to talk about gainfully incentivizing people in a way that both parties feel like their needs are met, to create content and talk about your problem space, right? And so we've got all of these, we have this sort of phalanx of evangelists who are talking about us and stuff, but we also want to be like long-term partners with them. And like, how do you actually build a system, or how do you build, put some guardrails on it, so that you can more deeply focus on like nurturing those relationships and those partnerships, versus right now, which is just like contract to hire, like anyone who's a part of the movement, like, let's do it. I really want to learn how you create, a creator program or an expert program that of people who like have subject matter expertise, not only just using your tool, but also talking about your problem, and doing that in a way that meets both the needs of the company and their long-term goals.
That makes sense. That's awesome. Where can people find you?
I'm sometimes on LinkedIn. I'm like the most anti-marketer ever. No social media, no anything. Email Derek@warmly.ai. Yeah, I feel like I'm an engineer in like a marketer's body, but yeah, email is probably the best.
And if they want to come and see the sort of cathedral in real life or in pixel form, where do you recommend they go?
Brooklyn, New York. That's where all the cathedrals are. Tallest one.
But I mean the Warmly site, like
Yeah.
I guess is probably the best place right now.
Is the best place to go. Yeah.
Nice, sweet. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah,
Derek.
Appreciate it.
Putting up with the the noobness of the podcast and its first
No,
its
great.
first rep.
It's great. It's great.
Sweet.